They say pain has a memory, but some memories feel like they were branded into your skin. Like even if I tried to scrub that night from my mind, it would still rise up beneath the surface, like a scar that never fades. And trust me, I've tried to forget how I stood there in James's doorway, with my shoulders tense and hope quietly screaming inside my chest, holding a heavy tray of homemade lasagna that I could barely afford to make, thinking this dinner would mean something, thinking he might look at me the way he used to before I lost my job, and, apparently, lost my worth in his eyes too. I was 24, broke, living off of ramen noodles, and the thin thread of belief that something better was waiting for me if I just held on long enough. And somehow, I thought love would be the one thing I didn't have to prove myself worthy of. But I was wrong, so painfully wrong. The second I walked into that room, his apartment smelled like stale cologne, cheap beer, and something colder than any winter I've ever known: disrespect. James didn't even look up right away. He was too busy high-fiving Kyle, grinning like he'd just hit the jackpot on a scratch-off, while his other friends lounged across the couch, their mouths stuffed with chips, their shoes kicked off like they owned the place, none of them even acknowledging the effort I'd made. When James finally glanced over, he didn't smile, didn't say thank you, didn't even offer to help me with the tray. Instead, he laughed, full volume, full cruelty, that laugh that turns your spine to glass and your heart to dust, and said, "You're seriously still jobless, Brielle?" And the room erupted like that was the punchline to a joke I didn't know I was the center of. One of them nearly spit out his drink. Another leaned forward, slapping his thigh like my unemployment was some kind of comedy special. I felt the heat rise to my face like boiling water had just poured over my skin. And I stood there frozen, surrounded by men who had done less than I had, achieved less, learned less, but still felt more valuable because they wore collared shirts to work and had titles gifted to them through daddy's connections. "What do you even do all day?" James kept going, like his words weren't knives. "Watch Netflix and cry?" That one made them really lose it, and something inside me cracked. Not like glass, but like ice that was about to melt into something dangerous. They had no idea how hard I'd been trying. Job applications, freelance gigs, rejection after rejection, late nights with my laptop glowing in the dark while I tried to believe in a future I couldn't see yet. They didn't know that I'd pawned my childhood necklace just to afford groceries last week, or that I'd skipped meals so I could afford the ingredients for that damn lasagna, because James once told me it reminded him of home. I thought maybe if I brought something comforting, something real, I could remind him I was still someone worth loving. But what I got instead was a verbal eulogy for the woman I used to be. "She's got a degree in—" "What was it again?" Kyle piped up, grinning like a weasel. "Creative strategy? Good luck with that in the real world." The others laughed so hard the couch shook, and James didn't stop them. He didn't defend me, didn't say I was smart or talented or hardworking. He just watched it happen, sipping his beer like it was just another Thursday. And I realized in that moment that I wasn't his girlfriend. I was a convenient placeholder, someone he could mock when he needed to feel taller. I stood there, rooted in place, while they turned my entire existence into a joke. My mouth went dry, and for a second, I wanted to scream, throw the lasagna across the room, demand they respect me. But I didn't. I just set the tray down, silently, gently, like it didn't matter anymore. Because it didn't. Nothing I could do in that room would change how little they saw me. "Hey, babe," James added with a smirk. "Next time, just bring wine. This whole trying too hard thing is kinda sad." That was the last straw. I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw nothing of the man I thought I loved. Just a boy in a grown man's body, drunk on ego and entitlement, sitting there surrounded by people who had never struggled a day in their lives and thought that made them special. I didn't say a word. I didn't cry in front of them, even though the tears burned behind my eyes like acid. I turned around, walked out the door, and let it close behind me with the quiet finality of a woman who knew this was the last time she'd ever let someone reduce her. I made it to the elevator before the first tear slipped down my cheek, and by the time I reached the parking lot, I was crying so hard I couldn't see straight. But it wasn't just sadness. It was anger, rage, betrayal, the kind that sinks into your bones and rewrites your DNA. I sat in my car for a long time, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. And I said out loud in the dark, "This is it. This is the last time." I didn't even fully know what I meant then. But something shifted in me that night, something fundamental and irreversible. I wasn't going to be the girl who begged for their respect anymore. I wasn't going to keep shrinking myself to make room for their egos. I was going to take every ounce of humiliation they fed me and use it to build something so fierce, so unstoppable, they'd one day choke on the memory of me. They thought I was worthless, but what they didn't know was that women like me, we rise in silence, we build in the shadows, and when we return, we come back with fire. After that night, after James and his smug friends left me standing in that dimly lit apartment, their laughter ringing in my ears like a cruel echo, I made a decision that would change everything. I ghosted them completely. No calls, no texts, no attempts to explain myself or beg for sympathy. I blocked James, Kyle, and every single one of those arrogant, privileged boys who thought their daddy's money and connections made them kings of the world. I didn't need closure from them, didn't want to waste another second on their hollow approval. What I needed was fire, a raging, untamable fire that would fuel my rise from the ashes of humiliation. So I packed what little I had and moved back to Detroit, to the only place that felt like home. My grandma's small, warm house with peeling paint and a garden full of stubborn daisies. It wasn't glamorous, and I traded my pride for progress that day, but it was the ground zero for my comeback. I was broke, tired, and desperate, but I was alive, and that was enough. I threw myself headfirst into hustling, anything to get by, anything to build. Social media strategy, branding, digital ads. I absorbed every skill I could find, teaching myself everything online while working 16-hour days. My nights were spent hunched over my laptop, eyes burning, fingers trembling from exhaustion, surrounded by cheap instant ramen wrappers and tears I tried to hide from my grandma. But I never stopped, not once. The pain of their laughter became the drumbeat in my ears, pushing me to learn more, work harder, and prove that I was more than the girl they mocked. I dove deep into the world of SEO and analytics, devouring online courses and tutorials, teaching myself how to read data and turn clicks into customers. The internet, cold and vast, became my teacher and my battlefield. Slowly, my efforts began to pay off. I built a personal brand online, sharing my journey and strategies, helping small businesses grow, and that authenticity started to attract attention. Clients trickled in at first, little jobs, side projects, but each one was a foothold on the mountain I was determined to climb. Word spread, and referrals came next, growing steadily into a tide I could finally ride. Then I took the biggest risk of my life. I launched a tiny agency out of my grandma's attic, naming it Kane Creative Syndicate, a nod to my heritage and the strength I was carving out for myself. It was cramped, cluttered, and far from glamorous, but it was mine. Within a year, that cramped attic became the headquarters for 6 hungry, talented employees who believed in the vision and the fight as much as I did. We worked around the clock, grinding through projects that ranged from local businesses trying to get noticed to ambitious startups with big dreams. By the end of year 2, Kane Creative Syndicate was no longer a scrappy upstart. It was a force, running full digital marketing campaigns for tech startups in Austin, food chains in Chicago, and even a major fashion brand in New York City. The journey was brutal. There were moments of doubt that clawed at my confidence, nights when the weight of responsibility and exhaustion threatened to crush me. But the fire inside never died. I refused to let my story end as the girl with no job, the joke James and his friends tossed around. And through it all, I kept an eye on the world they still inhabited, the one I was determined to surpass. The internet doesn't forget, and neither do I. I watched James's LinkedIn profile like a secret weapon, still stuck in that junior role, his ambitions barely crawling forward. Kyle, his sidekick, was assistant to some VP, a position that felt more like a consolation prize than an achievement. I smiled quietly to myself, not out loud, because patience was a weapon far sharper than any shout of victory. I knew my time was coming. Then came the moment that felt like the universe was tipping its hand in my favor. I made the bold move to relocate Kane Creative Syndicate's headquarters to San Francisco, the heart of innovation and the battlefield for countless startups. I poured everything I had into buying out a failing boutique firm to expand our reach, knowing that this step would be a defining one. And then, almost like a cruel joke, I received applications for jobs at my own company, unsuspecting candidates desperate for a foothold in the industry. And among them, familiar names appeared. James, the same man who laughed at my unemployment, who mocked my dreams and reduced me to a punchline, was applying to work under me. He didn't know who I was yet, didn't realize the woman he had dismissed and humiliated was now the CEO, the decision maker, the woman controlling his fate. That moment hit me like a tidal wave, vindication mixed with a burning desire to teach him a lesson he would never forget. I held my smile back, hiding the storm behind calm eyes, planning my moves carefully. This wasn't just revenge, it was justice. They never saw the hustle coming. They never imagined that the girl they scorned in a dingy apartment, with nothing but a dream and a fire in her gut, would rise to command a company that could decide their futures. I wasn't just going to prove them wrong. I was going to make sure they understood the cost of underestimating someone like me. The years of grinding, learning, sleepless nights and tears had forged me into someone unbreakable, and soon I would make them pay, not with hate, but with power. This was just the beginning, and I could feel the weight of what was coming, like a storm on the horizon, ready to break and wash away everything they thought they knew. Because women like me, we don't just survive, we rise, we conquer, and when we do, the world remembers. The moment James's name popped up on our hiring database, I nearly dropped my coffee, the bitter liquid trembling in my hand, as the irony of it all washed over me like a tidal wave. It was like the universe had served me a delicious, twisted gift on a silver platter, wrapped with a bow of poetic justice. My assistant Danny Blissfully unaware of the history I shared with James and his crew, proceeded to schedule him for an in-person interview, treating him like any other applicant. I didn't stop her, not because I wanted him to have a fair chance, but because I had something far more satisfying planned. I cleared my schedule immediately, blocking off the entire afternoon so I could personally oversee every detail. Danny arranged for the interview to be held in our high-rise downtown office, a sleek, glass-walled fortress overlooking the bustling city below. A stark contrast to the dingy apartment where they'd last seen me, as nothing but a punchline. I wanted James to soak in the grandeur, to witness firsthand the empire I had painstakingly built from the ground up. The moment he stepped into the conference room, the air shifted. He adjusted his tie nervously, his confident facade cracking ever so slightly under the weight of anticipation. I sat behind the one-way glass, watching every twitch of his expression, every bead of sweat forming on his brow, his eyes darting around, as if he could sense the predator waiting silently behind that mirrored wall. When I finally entered the room, his reaction was instantaneous. His entire body froze as he locked eyes with me, disbelief and recognition mingling into a cocktail of shock that rendered him speechless. "Brielle," he whispered, his voice barely audible, like a ghost stumbling into the wrong room at the wrong time. Wow, you look different." I smiled, but it wasn't the warm smile of the girl who once begged for his approval. It was cold, calculated, the smile of a woman who had clawed her way up from nothing and wasn't about to let him forget it. "Corporate success will do that to a woman, James," I said, my tone smooth but edged with steel. "Shall we begin?" The interview began, and James' confidence unraveled like a poorly stitched seam. He stumbled through the questions, his answers shaky and incomplete, like a high schooler fumbling through a book report on a novel he hadn't read. When he tried to lean on his vague experience, project coordination, team liaisoning, I cut in sharply, flipping through his resume as if it were a list of excuses. "Tell me, James," I said, my voice dropping to a mockingly sweet tone. "How do you handle conflict in the workplace? For instance, what would you do if you publicly belittled a colleague's struggles?" His jaw twitched, a flicker of guilt, or perhaps fear flashing across his face. "Listen, about the past," he started, but I raised a hand, silencing him with the authority I'd earned through relentless hustle and sacrifice. "This is a professional environment, James," I said, voice steady. "Let's focus on your qualifications." The rest of the interview was a blur of awkward stammering and defensive postures. When it was over, James left the room red-faced, muttering something about misunderstanding the situation and promising to improve. I let him go, my heart pounding not from excitement, but from the calm certainty that this was just the opening move in a much bigger game. 2 weeks later, I hired him. Not just James, but Kyle and 2 other friends from their little arrogant clique as well. I placed them all on probationary contracts, comfortable enough to lower their guard, secure enough to make them believe they'd made a fresh start in a company they didn't realize was mine. I wanted them relaxed, unaware that the storm they thought they'd escaped was gathering quietly, a tempest brewing directly above their heads. Each day, as they settled into their roles, oblivious to my presence beyond the occasional email or board meeting, I watched and planned. I observed how James still carried that misplaced arrogance, how Kyle tried desperately to blend in, and how the others clung to old loyalties that would soon crumble. The office was my chessboard, and they were the pawns, moving blindly toward their fate. I made sure to be everywhere and nowhere, the invisible hand steering their careers, while they stayed blind to the power I wielded. Every interaction was carefully calculated, small reminders of their place, subtle tests of their character, and seeds of doubt planted to bloom later. I let them talk about the old times, their jokes still laced with the arrogance that once crushed me, never guessing the woman laughing quietly behind the scenes was the one who now controlled their paychecks and their future. The irony was delicious, a slow-burning fire that warmed me through the toughest days. I had turned their mocking laughter into the soundtrack of my hustle, and now they were living inside the very empire I built to prove them wrong. The city around us bustled, unaware of the drama unfolding in that glass tower, where a young woman from Detroit had rewritten her story and flipped the script on those who doubted her worth. My employees, those 6 bright minds who had come with me from the attic to the skyscraper, were the army behind me, fueling the growth of Kane Creative Syndicate with their talent and dedication. And as the weeks passed, James and his friends became more comfortable, more careless, their true colors slowly revealing themselves in meetings and casual conversations. It was during one such moment that I first caught the flicker of real panic in James's eyes, when I asked for a detailed report on a campaign, and he realized just how far he was out of his depth. His overconfidence crumbled, replaced by desperation, but I held firm, knowing that breaking them slowly was the true victory. Every misstep they made, every error they committed, was another thread in the web I was weaving around them. I was patient, because revenge is a marathon, not a sprint. The hustle that had fueled me from the start carried me through every challenge, every sleepless night, every doubt whispered in the dark. I was no longer the girl who begged for a job. I was the woman who gave them the chance to prove themselves and would be the one to decide if they succeeded or fell. And fall they would, because beneath the polished floors and glass walls, beneath the veneer of professionalism, I was preparing my ultimate move, the moment when the joke would end and the lesson would begin. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about showing the world what happens when you mock someone's struggle and dismiss their potential. The corporate world could be cruel, yes, but it could also be just. I was determined to make justice happen on my terms, with precision and power. And as I sat in my office overlooking the city skyline, watching my former tormentors scurry unknowingly beneath me, I smiled, not with hatred, but with the quiet satisfaction of a woman who had harnessed her pain and turned it into unstoppable strength. They thought they had won that night, but I was just getting started. The empire was mine, and they were about to learn the true meaning of being beneath someone's feet. For the next 3 months, I became a silent observer in my own company, a queen watching her court jester's foolishness from the throne room. James, once so full of swagger and careless arrogance, slouched into the office with the same old lazy grin. But it no longer fooled me. I saw through every forced smile, every half-hearted nod during meetings, every glance at his phone when he thought no one was watching. He was slacking off like a kid who'd been handed a golden ticket but had no intention of ever using it responsibly. Kyle was the exact opposite kind of disaster. He sauntered through the office like he owned the place, throwing flirtatious winks at interns who barely knew what to make of him. His charm was a smokescreen for an utter lack of commitment, and while he thought he was playing the game perfectly, I was busy recording every reckless move. The rest of their little clique, the so-called friends, who once laughed at me for being jobless, were no better. They bragged openly in the break room about how they barely needed to try, and had it made. I watched it all unfold through the invisible web of technology, reviewing every Slack message, dissecting every email, catching every fake sick day, and every excuse they made to get out early. I didn't say a word, didn't send a warning or a stern glance. I let their arrogance build a web of laziness so thick and tangled, it was like watching a slow-motion car crash with a front-row seat. Every careless message they sent, every skipped meeting, every moment they treated the job like a joke. I documented it. Every single thread was proof. Every slip-up was evidence. I was the CEO they had once mocked, the woman they called worthless, now quietly holding the keys to their fate. And I was patient, so damn patient, because I knew when the moment was right, I'd strike with the force of everything they never saw coming. Then, just like clockwork, the perfect opportunity landed on my desk, a massive contract with a Fortune 500 company, the kind of deal that brings high visibility, intense scrutiny, and no room for failure. The stakes couldn't have been higher, and I assigned James and his crew to the project lead team, strategically, like pawns positioned for a checkmate. From day one, the disaster unfolded exactly as I had expected. James missed deadlines with careless disregard, showing up late to critical meetings, and sending half-baked updates that barely made sense. Kyle, rather than focus on the work, spent more time flirting and spinning excuses. Their arrogance was their downfall, the belief that someone else would swoop in to fix their mistakes, to cover their incompetence. Meanwhile, my real team, those who had earned my trust, worked tirelessly behind the scenes to clean up the mess. They stayed late nights, pulled double shifts, and whispered about how they couldn't believe these jokers had gotten so far on pure luck. But then, I made the decision that changed everything. I told my real team to stop fixing the mess. Let it show. Let the cracks widen until the whole house started to crumble. And crumble it did. The client noticed. Complaints started trickling in, then snowballed. The polite emails turned into urgent calls, and the firm hand of corporate oversight tightened around the project. I had everything I needed. The evidence of failure, the proof of arrogance, the unraveling of a crew too lazy and entitled to handle responsibility. So, I sent the email, a simple message that invited every single employee to a transparency and accountability session. The usual corporate buzzwords disguised what was about to unfold. Everyone assumed it was routine. Another meeting, another pep talk. But I had something very different planned. When the day came, I stood before the gathered staff in the sleek, glass-walled conference room of our downtown high-rise. The projector hummed to life, displaying the bold title, "The Cost of Arrogance, a Case Study." Jaws dropped, eyes widened. The room fell into a stunned hush, the kind of silence that feels like the calm before a storm. I began my presentation, laying out every screw-up in painstaking detail. Missed deadlines, botched presentations, countless lies, ignored meetings, each slide revealing another layer of their careless betrayal. I didn't hold back. I showed the screenshots of Slack messages where James mocked the company's processes, the emails where Kyle arrogantly dismissed feedback, and the countless excuses disguised as explanations. The evidence was irrefutable. Then, in a voice steady and clear, I declared, "The following employees are hereby terminated, effective immediately, for cause." I turned, locking eyes with James, the man who once laughed at me for being jobless, and added with icy calm, including one who used to mock me, "Consider this, your performance review." The room was deathly silent. Not a whisper, not a cough. Time seemed to freeze. And then, as if the tension cracked a dam, applause broke out. Not from me, but from the employees who had watched this arrogant group fall from their pedestal. It was a sound that filled the room with vindication, relief, and respect. In that moment, I felt something powerful settle in my chest, a mix of triumph, justice, and pride. I wasn't just firing a group of entitled slackers. I was reclaiming my story, proving that worth isn't given. It's earned. That arrogance and entitlement don't pay off in the real world. That sometimes the fiercest revenge isn't rage. It's quiet, calculated power. And as the echo of the applause faded, I knew this was just the beginning. The fall of James and his friends wasn't the end of my story. It was the moment I truly began to rise. The stunned silence lingered just a moment longer, after the applause died down. Then the murmurs began to ripple through the room like a wave, whispers of disbelief, of awe, of newfound respect for the woman who had quietly become their leader. I could see it in their eyes. The ones who had been silently suffering under the weight of incompetence and arrogance. They finally had a champion. I scanned the room, watching James struggle to process the weight of what just happened. His face was a mask of shock, disbelief, and maybe a flicker of regret. Kyle and the others were pale, mouths opening and closing like fish out of water, grasping at invisible straws. I held up my hand, commanding silence. "This isn't personal," I said, voice calm but firm. "It's about accountability, about respecting the hard work of everyone here, about valuing integrity over entitlement." My words sank in, each syllable punctuated by the soft hum of the projector fading away. I saw a few nods around the room. Danny, my assistant, looked at me with a quiet pride. She had no idea about the backstory, but she understood this moment was bigger than any single person. It was about setting a precedent, about making sure that no one ever thought they could treat others as less than, or take success for granted. To everyone still here, I continued, this company belongs to all of us, and I promise you, there will be no more shortcuts, no more arrogance, no more disrespect. The room was electric with energy, renewed hope, renewed purpose. Then, as the meeting broke up, I took one last look at the empty chairs, where James and his crew once sat. My heart was steady, my mind clear. The stage was set, the fall had begun, and I was ready to watch it unfold. As James and his crew were marched out by security, the weight of the silence in that massive conference room hit me harder than I expected. It wasn't the triumphant roar of a crowd that I imagined in my head all those nights when I lay awake, plotting revenge. It was this eerie stillness, a collective intake of breath, the kind of silence that can shatter egos and crack facades. I could feel every pair of eyes burning into the backs of those men who had once mocked me with such vicious certainty, whose laughter had cut deeper than any blade, whose casual cruelty had left scars I didn't know I carried until that night. James stopped at the doorway, turning back to look at me one last time, his eyes wild, angry, hollow, a reflection of the man who thought privilege was a guaranteed ticket to success, now confronted with the cold, hard truth that his laziness and arrogance had cost him everything. But I didn't respond with a smile or a wave. I didn't bask in the moment for show. I turned my back on him because this was never about gloating or petty revenge. This was about reclaiming my power, asserting my worth in a world that had tried to silence me, and proving that the woman they called worthless had become unstoppable. Back in the quiet of my office, the door shut with a soft click behind me, I allowed myself to breathe. for the first time that day. The buzzing of the city outside felt distant, muted, as if the entire world had paused to witness the rise of something new, something forged in fire and tempered by relentless determination. I stared out the window, seeing the skyline glitter with possibility, feeling an unshakable calm settle inside me. I wasn't the girl they had dismissed, the broke, jobless joke left crying in a corner. I was Brielle Kane, CEO of Kane Creative Syndicate, a woman-owned empire built from nothing but grit and fury. And I was ready for what came next. The media caught wind of the story within days after a junior employee's viral TikTok spread like wildfire. The video capturing the raw, unfiltered moment when a CEO fired her ex and his entitled friends for being trash humans. The reactions flooded in from every corner of the country. Young women who'd been belittled for their dreams, mothers who had been passed over despite years of dedication, fresh graduates feeling invisible in a world stacked against them. Their messages weren't just words. They were lifelines, cries of relief, and promises that they, too, would rise. They called me a hero, but I saw myself simply as a woman who refused to be silenced, who chose not to crumble under the weight of others' cruelty, but to build something so powerful they couldn't ignore it. If there was one thing I wanted my story to teach anyone, it was this: never underestimate the woman you mock today. She just might own your future tomorrow. In a society that still undervalues women, especially those who struggle to start or stumble along the way, success isn't about the speed of your ascent. It's about the depth of your belief in yourself, the fire you keep burning when the world tries to snuff it out. And when people laugh at your failures, use their laughter as fuel. Let it drive you to build an empire so bright they'll burn in your shadow. Over the following weeks and months, Kane Creative Syndicate grew beyond my wildest dreams. New clients came knocking, tech startups eager for fresh ideas, food chains desperate for rebranding, even major fashion houses wanting a slice of what we'd built. My team grew with talented, passionate individuals who believed in a culture of respect and merit, not entitlement and laziness. I launched mentoring programs for young women, internships that prioritized diversity and inclusion, and scholarships for those who faced barriers like I once did. I spoke at conferences, sharing my journey not for praise, but to inspire others to fight for their own space in this world. I established a foundation dedicated to helping women re-enter the workforce, especially those who had been cast aside or underestimated, just like I was. And through it all, I found a peace I never imagined possible. The kind that comes from knowing you've faced your demons, stood tall, and refused to be defined by anyone else's narrative. Power, I learned, isn't about crushing others beneath your feet. It's about rising with purpose, lifting others as you climb, and rewriting the rules so no one else has to suffer the way you did. Every sleepless night, every tear-streaked face staring at a screen full of rejection emails, every moment I questioned if I was enough, it all led here, to a moment where my past was no longer a chain, but a source of strength. I became more than just the woman James laughed at. I became the woman who proved him wrong on every front. And so, as I stand at my office window, overlooking the city, I feel a deep gratitude for the struggle that forged me, for the people who believed in me, and for the future I am building for women who come after me. A future where no young woman has to be mocked for her dreams, where talent and grit are the currency of success, and where power is a light that guides, not a weapon that wounds. This is my story, but it is also the story of every woman who's ever been told she wasn't enough. Let it remind you to believe relentlessly in your worth, to fight fiercely for your dreams, and to laugh last, because your victory will echo louder than any doubt ever could.